At Mercy General Hospital, Dorothy Washington lay in a bed in the emergency room. Her left wrist was broken in 2 places. Her shoulder had been popped back into place, but the damage was severe. Purple bruises covered her thin arm where Officer Reed had grabbed her. Dr. Martinez, the emergency room doctor, shook his head as he looked at Dorothy's x-rays. He had seen many injuries in his 20 years as a doctor, but this made him angry. The bones in Dorothy's wrist were shattered. She would need surgery and months of physical therapy. For a woman her age, she might never use her hand normally again. "Mrs. Washington, can you tell me what happened?" Dr. Martinez asked gently. Dorothy's eyes were glassy from pain medication, but she tried to focus. "The police officer grabbed my arm," she said slowly. "I told him he was hurting me, but he kept twisting it. I heard it crack." A nurse named Linda was writing down Dorothy's words. She had been a nurse for 15 years and had seen victims of violence before. This looked exactly like abuse to her. "Did you fight back or try to hit the officer?" Dr. Martinez asked. "No," Dorothy said weakly. "I'm too old to fight anyone. I was scared. I just wanted him to stop hurting me." Dr. Martinez made notes in Dorothy's file. By law, he had to report suspected abuse to the authorities. But this was different because the abuse came from a police officer. He wasn't sure what would happen to his report. Meanwhile, back at the police station, Officer Reed sat at his desk writing his report. He had been a cop long enough to know how to make things sound better than they really were. His thick fingers typed slowly on the computer keyboard. Reed wrote that he had responded to a call about an elderly woman acting erratically and creating a public disturbance. He said Dorothy had been walking in traffic and appearing confused and disoriented. None of this was true, but Reed knew that if he made Dorothy sound dangerous, his actions would seem more reasonable. In his report, Reed claimed that Dorothy had refused to comply with lawful orders and had physically resisted arrest, wrote that she had tried to pull away from him and that he had used minimal necessary force to subdue the suspect. Reed made it sound like Dorothy was a criminal who had brought her injuries on herself. Officer Sarah Chen sat at the desk next to Reed, staring at her blank computer screen. She was supposed to write her own report about what happened, but she didn't know what to say. She had seen the whole thing, and it was nothing like what Reed was writing. Chen was young and still believed that police officers were supposed to protect people, especially vulnerable people like elderly women. What Reed had done to Dorothy made her feel sick to her stomach. But Reed was her partner and had been on the force much longer than she had. "You going to write your report?" Reed asked, looking over at Chen. Chen nodded but didn't look at him. "I'm thinking about what to put. Just back up what I wrote," Reed said casually. "Old lady was being difficult and got hurt when she resisted. Simple as that." Chen knew that if she supported Reed's false story, she would be lying, but if she told the truth, she would be going against her partner. Other officers might not trust her anymore. She might even lose her job. "Did you see how small she was?" Chen said quietly. "She wasn't really resisting." Reed's face hardened. "Look, Chen, I've been doing this job a lot longer than you have. Sometimes people get hurt when they don't follow orders. That's not my fault, it's theirs." "But she's 73 years old," Chen said. "She probably weighs less than 110 pounds. So what?" Reed snapped. "Age doesn't give you the right to ignore police commands. I treated her the same way I'd treat anyone else." Chen wanted to say that this was exactly the problem. Dorothy should have been treated differently because she was elderly and confused, not like a dangerous criminal. But she kept quiet and slowly started typing her report. As Chen wrote, she tried to find a middle ground. She didn't want to lie completely, but she was afraid to directly contradict Reed. She wrote that Dorothy appeared confused and disoriented and that she did not immediately comply with verbal commands. Chen left out the part about Reed shouting and grabbing Dorothy roughly. At the same time, Maya Washington was rushing to the hospital. She had gotten a call from a neighbor saying her mother had been hurt by police and taken away in an ambulance. Maya worked as a secretary at a law firm downtown, and she had to leave in the middle of an important meeting. Maya's heart was pounding as she ran through the hospital corridors. She found her mother in the emergency room, looking tiny and fragile in the big hospital bed. Dorothy's left arm was in a cast and her face was pale with pain. "Mama, what happened?" Maya asked, taking her mother's good hand. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "A policeman hurt me, baby. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just sitting on the porch. Maya felt a wave of anger wash over her. Her mother was the gentlest person she knew. Dorothy had never even gotten a speeding ticket in her whole life. The idea of her being hurt by a police officer seemed impossible. Dr. Martinez came into the room and introduced himself to Maya. He explained Dorothy's injuries in detail. The broken wrist would require surgery. The shoulder was badly damaged. Dorothy would be in pain for months and might never regain full use of her arm. How did this happen? Maya demanded. According to your mother, a police officer grabbed her arm and twisted it until it broke, Dr. Martinez said carefully. I have to tell you these injuries are consistent with excessive force. Maya felt like she was going to be sick. Can't you do something? Report this? I've already made the required reports, Dr. Martinez said. But you should know that cases involving police officers can be complicated. Maya didn't understand what he meant, but she would learn soon enough. That evening, Police Chief Robert Thompson reviewed the reports from Reed and Chen. Thompson had been chief for 8 years, and his main concern was always protecting the reputation of his department. When he read about an elderly woman getting hurt during an arrest, his first instinct was to minimize the situation. Thompson called Reed into his office. Reed sat across from the chief's desk trying to look calm and professional. Tell me about this incident with the elderly woman, Thompson said. Reed repeated the same lies he had put in his report. He made Dorothy sound like a confused old woman who had endangered herself and others by wandering in traffic. He claimed she had resisted arrest and that her injuries were an unfortunate accident. Was there excessive force involved? Thompson asked directly. Absolutely not, sir, Reed said without hesitation. I used standard procedures for a non-compliant subject. It's unfortunate that she got hurt, but that's what happens when people don't follow lawful orders. Thompson nodded. He wanted to believe Reed because believing him would mean less trouble for the department. If Reed had really used excessive force on an innocent elderly woman, there could be lawsuits, bad publicity, and investigations. It was much easier to accept Reed's version of events. What about your partner? What does her report say? Chen backs up everything I've said, Reed lied smoothly. She saw the whole thing. Thompson made his decision quickly. I'm going to classify this as a standard arrest incident with accidental injury. No disciplinary action needed. Just make sure you document everything properly in case there are questions later. Reed smiled as he left the chief's office. He had gotten away with it. Just like he had gotten away with other incidents in the past, Reed had a history of being rough with people, especially minorities and elderly citizens, but his reports always made it sound justified. What Reed didn't know was that his luck was about to run out. Mr. Rodriguez's son had posted the video of the incident on social media. The footage clearly showed Reed brutally attacking a helpless elderly woman who was not resisting or fighting back. The video was starting to get attention online. People were sharing it and adding angry comments about police brutality. Local news reporters were beginning to take notice. Maya Washington spent the night at the hospital with her mother. Dorothy slept fitfully, waking up several times confused and in pain. Each time she woke up, Dorothy asked Maya why a police officer had hurt her. I don't know, Mama, Maya said, holding her mother's hand, but I'm going to find out. Maya had never dealt with anything like this before, but she was determined to get justice for her mother. She spent the night on her phone, looking up information about police brutality and what victims could do about it. By morning, Maya had made a decision. She was going to fight back against the system that had allowed her innocent mother to be brutalized. She didn't know how hard that fight would be, or how much it would change all of their lives. Officer Chen went home that night feeling terrible about the report she had written. She lived alone in a small apartment, and she spent hours staring at the ceiling, replaying the incident in her mind. She knew she had not told the whole truth, and it was eating at her conscience. Chen had become a police officer because she wanted to help people and make her community safer. She had never imagined she would be covering up for a colleague who had hurt an innocent person. But she was trapped between doing what was right and keeping her job. As Chen finally fell asleep, she had no idea that within days, everything would change. The video of Reed attacking Dorothy was spreading across the internet like wildfire, and soon the whole world would see what really happened on Elm. Maya Washington had barely slept. She sat beside her mother's hospital bed, watching Dorothy breathe slowly in her medicated sleep. The morning sun came through the window, but Maya felt like she was living in a nightmare. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her neighbor, Mrs. Chen. "Maya, you need to see this. Check Facebook right now." Maya opened the Facebook app on her phone. The first thing she saw was a video that had been shared by dozens of people she knew. The caption read, "Police brutality, cop breaks elderly woman's arm for no reason." Maya's hands started shaking as she watched the video. There was her mother, sitting peacefully on her porch in her blue flowered dress. Maya could see Officer Reed approaching with his angry face and loud voice. She watched her mother try to explain that she wasn't doing anything wrong. Then came the part that made Maya feel sick. The video clearly showed Reed grabbing her mother roughly and twisting her frail arm. Maya could hear her mother screaming in pain. She could see the exact moment when Dorothy's wrist snapped. The video was only 2 minutes long, but it told the whole story. Dorothy was not resisting. She was not fighting. She was just a scared, confused elderly woman being brutalized by a much larger man with a badge. Maya looked at the comments under the video. There were already hundreds of them and more appearing every few seconds. "This is disgusting. How can a cop do this to a grandmother? That officer should be in jail. Poor lady was just sitting on her porch. This makes me sick. Fire this cop now!" Maya saw that the video had been shared over 500 times in just a few hours. People were tagging their friends, local news stations, and civil rights organizations. The story was spreading fast across social media. Carlos Rodriguez Jr., the teenager who had recorded the video, never expected it to blow up like this. He had posted it because he was angry about what he saw happen to Mrs. Washington, who had always been kind to him. Carlos just wanted people to know what really happened. Now his phone was ringing constantly. News reporters wanted to interview him. Civil rights activists were asking for his help. The video had been viewed over 50,000 times and was still growing. Carlos felt scared but also proud. He knew he had done the right thing by recording what happened. Without his video, Officer Reed might have gotten away with his lies about Dorothy resisting arrest. At the police station, Chief Thompson was having the worst morning of his career. His phone had been ringing for 2 hours straight. Reporters, city council members, and angry citizens were all calling about the video of Officer Reed. Thompson watched the video on his computer screen with growing horror. This was not the story that Reed had told him. In the video, Dorothy was clearly not resisting or being combative. She was just a frightened old woman being attacked by an out-of-control police officer. Thompson realized that Reed had lied to him completely. Even worse, Thompson had believed the lies and decided not to investigate the incident. Now the whole world could see what really happened, and Thompson looked like either a fool or someone who was covering up police brutality. Thompson's secretary knocked on his door. "Sir, Channel 7 News is here. They want to interview you about the Dorothy Washington incident." Thompson felt his stomach drop. "Tell them I'm not available for comment at this time." But Thompson knew he couldn't hide forever. The video was now being shared on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Local news stations were already running stories about it. This was becoming a public relations disaster. Officer Reed was at home when his wife showed him the video on her phone. Reed's face went pale as he watched himself attacking Dorothy. In the video, he looked exactly like what he was. A bully picking on a helpless victim. "Marcus, tell me this isn't what it looks like," his wife Janet said, her voice shaking. Reed tried to stick to his story. She was resisting arrest. "The video doesn't show everything that happened before." Janet stared at her husband like she was seeing him for the first time. "She's 73 years old, Marcus. She weighs nothing. How could she possibly be a threat to you?" Reed got angry. "You don't understand police work. Sometimes you have to use force." "This isn't force," Janet said, pointing to the phone screen. "This is abuse. This is what bullies do." Reed stormed out of the house, but he knew his wife was right. He also knew that his career was probably over. The video made it impossible to deny what he had done. At Channel 7 News, reporter Amanda Foster was preparing to cover the biggest story of her career. She had seen the video online and immediately knew this was going to be huge. Amanda drove to Elm Street to interview neighbors about what they knew. She found Mr. Rodriguez, who told her that Dorothy was one of the sweetest people in the neighborhood. "Mrs. Washington never bothered anyone," Rodriguez said on camera. "She would give you the shirt off her back if you needed it. What that officer did to her is evil." Amanda also interviewed Mrs. Chen, who had known Dorothy for years. "She has some memory problems, but she's harmless," Mrs. Chen said. "She loves her garden and her Bible. The idea of her being dangerous is ridiculous." Other neighbors came forward with stories about Dorothy's kindness. She had baked cookies for new families moving into the neighborhood. She had watched children while parents went to work. Everyone described her the same way: gentle, sweet, and completely harmless. The contrast between these descriptions and what people saw in the video made Officer Reed look even worse. Maya Washington's phone was buzzing constantly. Reporters wanted to interview her about her mother. Civil rights lawyers were offering to take the case for free. Activists were asking her to speak at protests. Maya felt overwhelmed. She had never been involved in anything political before. She worked as a secretary, lived quietly, and just wanted to take care of her mother. Now she was being thrown into a national conversation about police brutality. But as Maya watched the video of her mother being hurt over and over again, she felt her fear turning into anger. Dorothy had raised 3 children by herself after Maya's father died. She had worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. She had never asked for anything from anyone. Now Dorothy was lying in a hospital bed with a shattered wrist because a police officer decided to take out his anger on a helpless woman. Maya realized that if she didn't fight for her mother, no one else would. Maya called the number for David Martinez, a civil rights lawyer who had left a message offering to help. Martinez had built his career fighting against police brutality and discrimination. "Mrs. Williams," Martinez said when Maya called him back, "I've seen the video of what happened to your mother. This is one of the clearest cases of excessive force I've ever seen." "What can we do?" Maya asked. "We can sue Officer Reed and the police department for millions of dollars," Martinez said. "But more importantly, we can make sure this never happens to anyone else's mother." Maya liked the sound of that. "What do I need to do?" "Just tell the truth about what your mother is like and let me handle the legal work," Martinez said. "Are you prepared for this to get bigger? This video is going viral and your family is about to be in the spotlight." Maya looked at her mother sleeping in the hospital bed. Dorothy's arm would never be the same. She would need months of physical therapy. She would probably be afraid of police officers for the rest of her life. "I'm ready," Maya said. "My mother didn't deserve this." By that afternoon, the video had been viewed over 200,000 times. It was being shared by celebrities, politicians, and activists. The hashtag Dawn or Justice for Dorothy was trending on Twitter. Local civil rights organizations announced they would hold a protest march on Saturday. They planned to march from Dorothy's neighborhood to the police station, demanding that Officer Reed be arrested and charged. Mayor Patricia Williams was getting pressure from all sides. Activists wanted Reed fired immediately. The police union was defending him, saying people should wait for all the facts. City council members were demanding an investigation. Mayor Williams watched the video in her office with her advisors. There was no question that what Reed had done was wrong. The only question was how to handle the situation. "We need to get ahead of this," said her chief of staff. "If we don't take action quickly, this is going to explode even bigger." At the hospital, Dorothy woke up from her surgery. The doctors had put several pins in her wrist to hold the broken bones together. She was confused and in pain. "Maya?" Dorothy called weakly. "I'm here, Mama," Maya said, taking her mother's good hand. "Why did he hurt me?" Dorothy asked, tears in her eyes. "I wasn't doing anything wrong." Maya felt her heart breaking. Her mother was asking the same question that hundreds of thousands of people around the world were asking as they watched the video online. "I don't know, Mama," Maya said, "but we're going to make sure he can't hurt anyone else." Dorothy closed her eyes again, but Maya could see she was still crying. The pain medicine helped with her physical pain, but nothing could heal the emotional trauma of being attacked for no reason. That night, the story made it onto national news. CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC all ran segments about the video. Legal experts debated whether Officer Reed would face criminal charges. Social media exploded with outrage and demands for justice. Officer Reed sat in his living room, watching his life fall apart on television. His phone kept ringing, but he was afraid to answer it. Reporters had... 3 days after the video went viral, District Attorney Jessica Chen stood before a crowd of reporters outside the courthouse. The pressure had become too much for the city to ignore. Over 500,000 people had now seen the video of Officer Reed attacking Dorothy Washington. After reviewing all available evidence, DA Chen announced, "I am filing criminal charges against Officer Marcus Reed. He is being charged with assault in the second degree and civil rights violations under federal law." The crowd of reporters shouted questions. But DHN continued with her prepared statement. What we see in this video is not police work. It is the criminal assault of an innocent elderly woman who posed no threat to anyone. Maya Washington stood at the back of the crowd with her lawyer, David Martinez. She had been afraid that nothing would happen to Officer Reed because he was a police officer. Seeing him finally face charges felt like the first step toward justice for her mother. At the police station, Chief Thompson was forced to take action he had been trying to avoid. He called Reed into his office one final time. "Reed, you're suspended without pay, effective immediately," Thompson said, not looking Reed in the eyes. "Turn in your badge and weapon." Reed had expected this moment, but it still felt like a punch to the stomach. Being a police officer was all he had ever known how to do. "Chief, this is all being blown out of proportion. One video doesn't tell the whole story." "The video tells enough of the story," Thompson replied coldly. "You lied to me about what happened. You made this department look bad. Clean out your locker." Reed realized that Thompson was throwing him under the bus to save his own career. The chief who had backed him up just days before was now treating him like a criminal. 2 hours later, Reed was arrested at his home. News cameras captured him being led away in handcuffs as his wife and children watched from their front window. The image of Reed in handcuffs would be shown on television for days. Meanwhile, David Martinez was building the civil case against Reed in the police department. He had been a civil rights lawyer for 20 years and had handled many cases of police brutality. But this one was different. The video evidence was so clear that there was no way for the other side to deny what happened. Martinez met with Maya and Dorothy at the hospital. Dorothy was still weak from her surgery, but she was determined to tell her story. "I want people to know that I never hurt anyone in my life," Dorothy said slowly. "I raised my children to be respectful to police officers. I never thought one would hurt me like this." Martinez explained that they would be suing for several $1,000,000 in damages. The money would help pay for Dorothy's medical bills and provide for her care. But more importantly, a large settlement would send a message that this kind of behavior was unacceptable. "Mrs. Washington, this case is going to bring a lot of attention to you and your family," Martinez warned. "Are you ready for that?" Dorothy nodded weakly. "If it helps other people, then I'm ready." Martinez also had to investigate Reed's history as a police officer. What he found made him angry. Reed had received numerous complaints over his 15-year career, especially from elderly citizens and minorities. There were reports of Reed being unnecessarily rough during arrests, using racist language, and intimidating people during traffic stops. The pattern was clear. Reed was a bully who had been protected by the system for years. Dorothy Washington just happened to be unlucky enough to cross his path on a day when he decided to take his anger out on someone helpless. Most shocking was a complaint from 2 years earlier. An elderly Hispanic man named Roberto Valdez had accused Reed of shoving him during a noise complaint call. Valdez had fallen and injured his hip, but he was too scared to pursue the matter further. Reed had received no punishment for that incident. Martinez realized that if the department had taken action against Reed after the Valdez incident, Dorothy might never have been hurt. The system had failed to protect vulnerable people from a dangerous officer. Judge Patricia Moore was assigned to handle Reed's criminal case. Judge Moore had been on the bench for 12 years and had a reputation for being tough but fair. She had seen the video like everyone else, and she was not impressed with what Reed had done. Reed's first court appearance was packed with reporters and protesters. Outside the courthouse, civil rights groups held signs demanding justice for Dorothy. Counter-protesters supported Reed, claiming that police officers were being unfairly attacked. Reed walked into the courtroom wearing a suit instead of his uniform. He looked smaller and older than he had in his police photos. His lawyer, Robert Kane, was a criminal defense attorney who specialized in defending police officers. When Judge Moore called the case, she looked directly at Reed. "Mr. Reed, you are charged with assault in the second degree and federal civil rights violations. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Reed said in a quiet voice. Judge Moore set bail at $50,000. Reed's wife had to mortgage their house to pay the bail bondsman. As Reed left the courthouse, protesters shouted at him, calling him a coward and a bully. The criminal case was just beginning, but the civil lawsuit was moving forward quickly. Martinez filed a complaint seeking $5 million in damages from Reed and the police department. The lawsuit included detailed descriptions of Dorothy's injuries and the impact on her life. Before the attack, Dorothy had been able to live independently despite her memory problems. Now she needed help with basic tasks like dressing and cooking because her dominant hand was damaged. The lawsuit also revealed the extent of Reed's history of complaints. Martinez argued that the police department was liable because they had failed to properly supervise and discipline Reed despite numerous warning signs. Chief Thompson was furious when he saw the lawsuit. He knew that if the city lost, it could cost taxpayers millions of dollars. He also knew that his own job might be in danger if it came out that he had ignored Reed's pattern of behavior. Thompson called an emergency meeting with the city attorney and the mayor. They needed to decide whether to fight the lawsuit or try to settle it quietly. "How strong is their case?" Mayor Williams asked the city attorney. "Very strong," the attorney admitted. "The video is devastating evidence, and Reed's history of complaints shows a pattern. A jury is going to be very sympathetic to an elderly victim." Mayor Williams was facing re-election in 6 months. She knew that how she handled this case could determine whether she kept her job. "What are our options?" "We can try to settle early and minimize the damage," the city attorney suggested. "Or we can fight it and risk a huge jury verdict." Thompson argued for fighting the case. "If we settle every time someone claims police brutality, we'll go bankrupt." But the mayor was thinking about the political costs. The video had made the city look bad nationally. She needed to show that she was taking action against police misconduct. While the lawyers debated strategy, Officer Sarah Chen was facing her own crisis of conscience. She had been called to testify as a witness in both the criminal and civil cases. Chen knew that Reed's lawyers would want her to support the false story that Dorothy had resisted arrest. But she also knew that Martinez would cross-examine her about what she really saw. Chen met with a lawyer provided by the police union. The lawyer explained that her job might be in danger if she testified against Reed. "Just stick to the facts in your original report," the union lawyer advised. "Don't volunteer any additional information." But Chen's original report had been carefully worded to avoid directly contradicting Reed, while also not completely supporting his lies. She had been trying to protect herself, but now she realized that her evasiveness might help Reed escape justice. Chen went home that night and watched the video again on her phone. She saw Dorothy sitting peacefully on her porch. She saw Reed's unnecessary aggression. She saw the moment when Dorothy's wrist snapped. Chen realized that she had a choice to make. She could continue to protect her own career by staying silent about Reed's lies, or she could do what was right and tell the truth about what she had witnessed. That night, Chen called her mother, who lived in another state. "Mom, I'm in a difficult situation at work. There's an officer who did something wrong and I saw it happen." "What did he do?" her mother asked. Chen described the incident with Dorothy. Her mother was quiet for a long time. "Sarah," her mother finally said, "you became a police officer to protect people, not to protect bad cops. You know what the right thing to do is." Chen knew her mother was right, but she also knew that doing the right thing might cost her everything she had worked for. Meanwhile, Dorothy was slowly recovering at home with Maya's help. The surgery had been successful, but Dorothy's hand would never be completely normal again. She had trouble gripping objects and experienced constant pain. Worse than the physical pain was the emotional trauma. Dorothy was afraid to sit on her front porch anymore. She flinched whenever she saw a police car. The confident, independent woman she had been was gone, replaced by someone who jumped at loud noises and had nightmares about being attacked. Maya had taken time off work to care for her mother. She was also dealing with the stress of the lawsuit and the constant media attention. Reporters called her every day asking for updates or comments, but Maya was determined to see the case through to the end. "Mom." The courthouse was packed on the first day of Officer Marcus Reed's criminal trial. Maya Washington sat in the front row behind the prosecutor's table, holding her mother's good hand. Dorothy looked smaller and more fragile than ever in her best dress, but her eyes were determined. Judge Patricia Moore looked out at the crowded courtroom. "This trial has attracted a lot of public attention," she announced. "But I want everyone to remember that we are here to determine the facts based on evidence, not emotion or public opinion." District Attorney Jessica Chen stood to give her opening statement. She was known for being tough on crime, but this case was personal for her. Watching the video of Reed attacking Dorothy had reminded her of her own elderly grandmother. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," DHN began, "what you will see in this trial is simple. A police officer who took out his anger and frustration on a helpless 73-year-old woman who was doing nothing wrong." DHN played the video for the jury on a large screen. Even though most people had already seen it online, watching it in the quiet courtroom was different. You could hear Dorothy's cries of pain clearly. You could see the exact moment when Reed twisted her arm until it broke. Dorothy Washington was sitting on her own porch reading her Bible, DHN continued. She was not breaking any law. She was not threatening anyone. She was simply an elderly woman with some memory problems who got confused sometimes. DHN explained that Reed had multiple chances to handle the situation differently. He could have spoken to Dorothy gently. He could have called her family. He could have asked for a mental health professional to help. Instead, Officer Reed chose violence, DHN said. He chose to use his size and his power to hurt someone who could not fight back. That is not police work. That is assault. Reed's defense attorney, Robert Kane, had a difficult job. The video showed clearly what Reed had done, so Kane had to try a different approach. "My client, Officer Reed, is not perfect," Kane told the jury, "but he is not a criminal." He responded to a call about a confused elderly woman who appeared to be in danger. His job was to protect her and protect the public. Kane tried to argue that Dorothy's memory problems made her unpredictable and potentially dangerous. He suggested that Reed had no choice but to use force when Dorothy did not follow his commands. "Police officers have to make split-second decisions," Kane said. "They cannot know if someone who appears confused might suddenly become violent." Officer Reed was doing his job the way he was trained to do it. But Kane's argument fell flat when the video was shown again. Dorothy clearly posed no threat to anyone. She was sitting calmly until Reed started shouting at her. The prosecution's first witness was Carlos Rodriguez Jr., the teenager who had recorded the video. Carlos was nervous about testifying, but he told the jury exactly what he had seen. "Mrs. Washington was just sitting on her porch like always," Carlos said. "She wasn't bothering nobody. When the cops started yelling at her, I could see she was scared." Carlos described how he had started recording because he was worried about Dorothy. "She's like everybody's grandma in the neighborhood. When I saw that big cop grabbing her, I knew something bad was going to happen." The defense attorney tried to suggest that Carlos had only recorded part of the incident and that something might have happened before he started filming. But Carlos was clear that he had seen the whole thing from his window. Dr. Martinez, the emergency room doctor who had treated Dorothy, testified about her injuries. He showed x-rays of Dorothy's shattered wrist and explained how much force would have been needed to cause such damage. "In my professional opinion, these injuries were caused by someone twisting Mrs. Washington's arm with significant force," Dr. Martinez said. "The bones in her wrist were not just cracked, they were shattered." Dr. Martinez also testified about Dorothy's mental state when she arrived at the hospital. She was confused and frightened. She kept asking why the police officer had hurt her. She clearly did not understand what she had done wrong. The most powerful witness was Dorothy herself. Maya helped her mother walk slowly to the witness stand. Dorothy's left arm was still in a brace, and she moved carefully because of the pain. DHN asked Dorothy to tell the jury about that morning in her own words. "I was sitting on my porch reading my Bible," Dorothy said in a quiet voice. "I like to sit there in the morning when it's peaceful." Dorothy described how Reed had approached her aggressively from the beginning. "He was shouting at me and I didn't understand why. I told him I wasn't doing anything wrong." "What happened when Officer Reed grabbed your arm?" DHN asked gently. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "It hurt so bad. I begged him to stop, but he kept twisting it harder. I heard it crack and the pain was terrible." "Did you try to fight Officer Reed or resist his commands?" "No," Dorothy said firmly. "I'm an old woman. I couldn't fight him if I wanted to. I was just scared and wanted him to leave me alone." The defense attorney's cross-examination of Dorothy was brief. Kane knew that attacking a sympathetic elderly victim would only make the jury hate his client more. He tried to suggest that Dorothy's memory problems might make her testimony unreliable, but Dorothy's answers were clear and consistent. "Mrs. Washington, is it possible that you don't remember everything that happened that day?" Kane asked. "I remember the important parts," Dorothy replied. "I remember that I wasn't doing anything wrong, and I remember how much that man hurt me." The prosecution also called several neighbors to testify about Dorothy's character. Everyone described her the same way: kind, gentle, and harmless. Mr. Rodriguez testified that Dorothy had never caused any problems in the neighborhood. She would give you the shirt off her back if you needed it, Rodriguez said. The idea of her being a threat to a police officer is ridiculous. Mrs. Chen, Dorothy's neighbor, testified about Dorothy's mental condition. She does get confused sometimes, especially about what day it is or where she put things. But she's never been violent or aggressive. She's the sweetest person you could meet. The prosecution's case was going well, but everyone was waiting for the most important witness. Officer Sarah Chen had finally decided to tell the truth about what she had witnessed. She knew it would probably end her career as a police officer, but she could not live with herself if she helped Reed escape justice. Chen wore her police uniform to court, but she looked uncomfortable in it. She had lost weight from the stress of the past few months and had trouble sleeping at night. Officer Chen, you were Marcus Reed's partner on the day of this incident, D.A. Chen said. Please tell the jury what you observed. Chen took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been dreading and preparing for. I saw Officer Reed approach Mrs. Washington in an aggressive manner from the beginning, Chen testified. He was shouting at her and treating her like a criminal, even though she was clearly not a threat. Chen described how Dorothy had tried to explain that she wasn't doing anything wrong, but Reed had become increasingly angry and impatient. Did Mrs. Washington resist arrest or try to fight Officer Reed? Chen asked. No, Chen said firmly. She was scared and confused, but she was not resisting. She was just trying to understand why we were there. Chen's testimony was devastating to Reed's case. As his own partner, she had credibility with the jury. Her decision to tell the truth showed that even other police officers thought what Reed did was wrong. The defense attorney tried to attack Chen's credibility during cross-examination. Officer Chen, didn't you write a report that supported Officer Reed's version of events? Kane asked. Chen looked ashamed. I wrote a report that was not completely honest. I was afraid of the consequences of contradicting my partner. So you lied in your official report? I didn't tell the whole truth, Chen admitted. I was wrong to do that, and I regret it every day. Kane tried to suggest that Chen was only changing her story now to save her own career, but Chen was ready for that attack. Telling the truth is actually hurting my career, Chen said. I know that other officers may not trust me anymore, but I became a police officer to protect people, and Mrs. Washington needed protecting from my partner. The prosecution also presented evidence about Reed's history of complaints and violent incidents. The jury heard about Roberto Valdez, the elderly Hispanic man whom Reed had shoved 2 years earlier. They learned about other citizens who had accused Reed of using excessive force. Maya Washington took the stand to describe how the attack had changed her mother's life. My mother used to be independent, Maya testified. She took care of herself and her house. Now she needs help with everything because of her damaged hand. Maya also described Dorothy's emotional trauma. She's afraid to sit on her porch anymore. She has nightmares about being attacked. She used to trust police officers, but now she's scared of them. The defense tried to present Reed as a dedicated officer who had made an honest mistake. They called his supervisor to testify about his years of service and some of the good arrests he had made. But when Reed himself took the stand, his testimony was unconvincing. He stuck to his story that Dorothy had been resisting arrest, but the video clearly contradicted his claims. Mr. Reed, can you explain why the video shows Mrs. Washington sitting calmly until you began shouting at her? DHN asked during cross-examination. Marcus Reed sat in his empty house, staring at the guilty verdict paperwork on his kitchen table. The house that had once been filled with the sounds of his family was now silent. His wife Janet had taken their 2 children and moved in with her sister across town 3 weeks ago. I can't look at you anymore, Janet had said when she packed their bags. Every time I see you, I think about that poor old lady screaming in pain. I don't know who you are. Reed had tried to explain, tried to make Janet understand that police work was complicated, but Janet had watched the video like everyone else. She saw her husband attacking a helpless grandmother, and she could not forgive him for it. The divorce papers had arrived 2 days after the guilty verdict. Janet was asking for full custody of their 8-year-old daughter Emma and 12-year-old son Tyler. She was also asking for the house, half of Reed's pension and child support. But Reed's pension was gone. The police department had terminated him immediately after the guilty verdict, which meant he lost all of his retirement benefits. 15 years of service meant nothing now. Reed's lawyer had told him to expect a prison sentence of 6 to 8 years. Judge Moore was known for giving harsh sentences to police officers who broke the law, because she believed they should be held to a higher standard. Reed opened a beer, even though it was only 10 in the morning. Drinking had become his main activity since the trial ended. He told himself it helped him cope with the stress, but really he was trying to numb the shame and anger that ate at him every day. The phone rang, but Reed didn't answer it. It was probably another reporter wanting a comment about his upcoming sentencing. Reed had stopped talking to the media after his lawyer told him that everything he said was making things worse for him. Reed's neighbors avoided him now. Parents pulled their children inside when they saw him coming. The man who used to be respected as a police officer was now seen as a dangerous criminal. Mrs. Patterson, who lived next door, had called the police twice in the past month to complain about Reed's loud music and yelling late at night. The responding officers were embarrassed to arrest one of their former colleagues, but they had no choice when Reed became belligerent with them. Reed looked at a photo on the mantel of himself in his police uniform, taken when he graduated from the academy 16 years ago. He had been proud that day, proud to serve and protect his community. Now that uniform represented everything he had lost. Reed's financial situation was getting desperate. He had been making $65,000 a year as a police officer, but that income was gone. His unemployment benefits had been denied because he was terminated for criminal conduct. The mortgage on his house was 3 months behind. Reed had tried to find another job, but no one wanted to hire a convicted felon. Even entry-level positions at fast food restaurants turned him down when they ran background checks. The civil lawsuit was still ongoing, and Reed's lawyer told him that Dorothy Washington's family would probably win millions of dollars in damages. If Reed had any assets left after his divorce, they would be seized to pay the judgment. Reed walked to his bedroom and opened the closet where his police uniform still hung. Janet had asked him to throw them away, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Being a police officer had been his identity for 15 years. Without that badge, he didn't know who he was. Reed pulled out his dress uniform and held it up to the mirror. The man looking back at him was different from the confident officer who used to wear this uniform. Reed's face was puffy from drinking and his eyes were bloodshot. He had gained 30 pounds from sitting around feeling sorry for himself. Reed's phone buzzed with a text message from his son, Tyler. "Mom says we can't see you until after you go to prison. I hate you for what you did to that old lady." Reed felt like he had been punched in the stomach. His own son hated him. Tyler had been proud to tell his friends that his dad was a cop. Now Tyler was embarrassed to have Reed's last name. Reed threw his phone against the wall, cracking the screen. He was tired of everyone treating him like a monster. In his mind, he had just been doing his job. Dorothy Washington had been acting strangely, and Reed had responded the way he was trained to respond. But deep down, Reed knew that was not true. He had been angry that morning, angry about his supervisor criticizing him, angry about his mounting bills, angry about his failing marriage. When Dorothy had not immediately obeyed his commands, Reed had taken out all of that anger on her. Reed had always been quick to use force as a police officer. He believed that people needed to respect his authority, and if they didn't, they deserved whatever happened to them. But Dorothy Washington was different. She was not a criminal or a threat. She was just a confused elderly woman who needed help, not violence. Reed opened another beer and turned on the television. The local news was running a story about police reform measures being considered by the city council. Dorothy Washington's case had sparked a citywide conversation about how police officers should be trained and supervised. The news reporter interviewed Maya Washington about her mother's recovery. Dorothy was shown doing physical therapy exercises to rebuild strength in her damaged hand. She moved slowly and carefully, still in obvious pain months after the attack. "My mother will never be the same," Maya said to the reporter. "She used to be independent and confident. Now she's afraid to leave the house without someone with her." Reed felt a brief moment of guilt watching Dorothy struggle with her exercises, but he quickly pushed that feeling away and focused on his resentment. This whole situation was ruined his life, and he blamed everyone except himself. Reed's former partner, Sarah Chen, was also dealing with the consequences of her decision to tell the truth. The other police officers treated her like a traitor for testifying against Reed. Someone had spray-painted "snitch" on her car. Her locker at work was vandalized. Chen had requested a transfer to a different department, but her reputation would follow her anywhere she went. Other officers didn't trust her anymore, which made police work dangerous. In situations where backup was needed, Chen worried that other officers might not respond quickly enough to help her. Chen's sergeant had made it clear that she was not welcome on the force anymore. "We can't have officers who won't support their partners," he told her during a performance review. Chen knew her career in law enforcement was probably over, but she did not regret her decision. Every time she saw Dorothy Washington on the news, Chen felt proud that she had helped convict Reed. Chen had enrolled in night classes to become a social worker. She wanted to find a way to help people that did not involve carrying a gun or making arrests. The police force had lost a good officer, but the social work field would gain someone who truly cared about helping vulnerable people. Reed's sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following week. His lawyer had advised him to show remorse and apologize to Dorothy Washington and her family. But Reed was not sure he could do that convincingly. Reed still believed that he had been unfairly treated by the system. In his mind, he was the victim of a media witch hunt and political correctness. He blamed the viral video, the protesters, and the politicians who had demanded his prosecution. Reed's lawyer visited him at home to prepare for the sentencing hearing. Robert Kane had defended many police officers over the years, but Reed was one of the most difficult clients he had ever worked with. "Marcus, you need to show the judge that you understand what you did was wrong," Kane said. "If you come across as defiant or unremorseful, she's going to give you the maximum sentence." "I was doing my job," Reed insisted. "That woman was acting crazy and I had to control the situation." Kane shook his head. "The jury didn't see it that way, and neither will the judge. You need to accept responsibility for what happened." Reed finished his beer and opened another one, even though Kane was sitting right there. Reed no longer cared what people thought about his drinking. "I've lost everything already," Reed said. "My job, my family, my house. What difference does it make if I get 6 years or 8 years in prison?" Kane tried to explain that showing remorse might help Reed get a lighter sentence and would be important for any future parole hearings. But Reed was not interested in taking responsibility for his actions. Reed's drinking had gotten so bad that he was consuming a 12-pack of beer most days. He had gained 40 pounds and rarely showered or shaved. The proud police officer was becoming a broken-down drunk who felt sorry for himself. Reed's parents had stopped calling him after he became verbally abusive with them on the phone. His brothers and sisters were embarrassed to be associated with him. Reed had always been the successful one in the family, the one with a steady job and a nice house. Now he was the family disgrace. Reed walked to his mailbox and found another stack of bills he couldn't pay. The electric company was threatening to shut off his power. The bank was starting foreclosure proceedings on his house. Reed's credit cards were maxed out, and he owed money to everyone. Reed had asked his parents for a loan to help with his expenses, but they had refused. "You brought this on yourself," his father had said. "We're not going to enable your self-destructive behavior." The isolation was the hardest part for Reed. He had always been social, going out with other officers after work and attending police department. Judge Patricia Moore looked down at Marcus Reed with disgust as he stood before her for sentencing. Reed swayed slightly and she could smell alcohol on his breath even from the bench. His appearance was disheveled, his face bloated from months of heavy drinking. "Mr. Reed," Judge Moore began, her voice cold and formal, "you have been found guilty of assault in the 2nd degree and federal civil rights violations. Before I impose sentence, do you have anything to say to the court?" Reed's lawyer had prepared a speech for him, full of apologies and expressions of remorse. But as Reed looked out at the packed courtroom, he saw Dorothy Washington sitting in the front row with her daughter Maya. Dorothy looked frail and scared, her damaged arm still in a protective brace. Reed felt a flash of the same anger that had driven him to attack Dorothy in the first place. Instead of the prepared apology, different words came out of his mouth. "Your Honor, I served this community faithfully for 15 years, Reed said, his words slightly slurred. "I put my life on the line every day to protect people. One incident shouldn't destroy my entire career." Judge Moore's expression hardened. Maya Washington shook her head in disbelief. Even after everything that had happened, Reed still didn't understand what he had done wrong. "Mr. Reed, this was not just one incident," Judge Moore responded sharply. "This was a brutal attack on an innocent elderly woman who posed no threat to anyone. Your lack of remorse is disturbing and will be reflected in your sentence." Judge Moore had reviewed Reed's entire file, including all the complaints against him over the years. She had seen the pattern of violence and abuse of power that had led to this moment. "Police officers are given extraordinary power in our society," Judge Moore continued. "When they abuse that power, they must face extraordinary consequences. You used your badge and your size to terrorize a vulnerable woman. You then lied about it to try to escape responsibility." Judge Moore sentenced Reed to 8 years in state prison, the maximum allowed under the law. Reed would have to serve at least 6 years before being eligible for parole. Reed's legs buckled when he heard the sentence. 8 years seemed like a lifetime to him. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder to steady him. "Furthermore," Judge Moore added, "you will pay full restitution to Mrs. Washington for her medical expenses and ongoing care. The exact amount will be determined in the civil proceeding." As Reed was led away in handcuffs, he looked back at Dorothy Washington one more time. She was not looking at him with hatred or anger. Instead, she looked sad, as if she felt sorry for him. That look of pity somehow hurt Reed more than any harsh words could have. The civil lawsuit was settled 3 weeks later. The city agreed to pay Dorothy Washington $2.3 million to avoid the risk of an even larger jury verdict. The money would pay for Dorothy's medical care for the rest of her life and provide some financial security for her family. Maya Washington spoke to reporters outside the courthouse after the settlement was announced. "This money won't give my mother back the use of her hand," she said. "It won't take away her nightmares or her fear of police officers, but it will ensure she gets the care she needs." David Martinez, the civil rights lawyer, was pleased with the settlement. "This sends a message that there are real consequences for police brutality," he said. "Hopefully, other officers will think twice before they abuse their power." The settlement also required the police department to implement new training programs on dealing with elderly and mentally impaired citizens. Officers would be required to take yearly courses on de-escalation techniques and recognizing signs of dementia or other cognitive disorders. Chief Thompson announced his resignation the day after the settlement was reached. He had been under pressure from the mayor and city council to step down ever since it became clear that he had failed to properly supervise Reed despite multiple warning signs. "I take full responsibility for the failure of leadership that allowed this tragedy to occur," Thompson said in his resignation letter. "It is time for new leadership to restore trust between the police department and the community." Reed began serving his sentence at Millfield Correctional Institution, a medium-security prison about 2 hours from his hometown. The transition from respected police officer to convicted felon was brutal. Other inmates immediately recognized Reed as a former cop. In prison culture, police officers were considered the lowest form of life, below even child molesters and rapists. Reed was marked for harassment from his first day inside. Reed's cellmate was a man named Carlos Vega, who had been arrested by Reed 3 years earlier during a drug bust. Vega recognized Reed immediately and made it clear that life was going to be difficult for the former officer. "Look who we got here," Vega said with a cruel smile. "Officer Reed, remember me? You broke my nose when you arrested me." Reed tried to act tough, but he was scared. He had sent many men to this same prison during his career, and now he was trapped with them. The other inmates played psychological games with Reed. They would whisper threats when the guards weren't listening. They would bump into him accidentally in the hallways. Someone put broken glass in his food during his second week inside. Reed requested protective custody, which meant being locked in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. It was safer than being in the general population, but the isolation was mentally crushing. Reed spent his days in a tiny cell with no television, no books, and nothing to do but think about how his life had fallen apart. He wrote letters to his ex-wife, Janet, begging her to bring their children for visits, but she never responded. Reed also wrote letters to Dorothy Washington, claiming that he was sorry for what had happened. But his letters were filled with excuses and self-pity rather than genuine remorse. Maya Washington threw them in the trash without showing them to her mother. Meanwhile, Dorothy was slowly adapting to her new reality. The physical therapy had helped somewhat, but her left hand would never work normally again. Simple tasks like buttoning her clothes or opening jars were difficult and painful. Dorothy had moved in with Maya and her family. She was too afraid to live alone anymore, especially after dark. The confident, independent woman who had raised 3 children by herself was now dependent on others for basic needs. Dorothy's memory problems had gotten worse since the attack. The trauma and stress had accelerated her mental decline. Some days she forgot that Reed was in prison and worried that he might come back to hurt her again. "Is that bad man going to come to my house again?" Dorothy would ask Maya during her confused moments. "No, Mama," Maya would reassure her. "He's in prison and can't hurt you anymore." But Dorothy's fear was not entirely irrational. She received hate mail from people who supported Reed and blamed her for destroying a good police officer's life. The letters were cruel and threatening, forcing Maya to change their address and get an unlisted phone number. The case had also taken a toll on Maya's family. Her teenage daughter was embarrassed by all the media attention. Her husband had to take a second job to help pay for Dorothy's care, even with the settlement money. Maya had become an accidental activist, speaking at community meetings and police reform conferences. She had not asked for this role, but she felt obligated to use her family's experience to help prevent similar tragedies. "My mother was just sitting on her porch reading her Bible," Maya would tell audiences. "If this can happen to her, it can happen to anyone's grandmother." Officer Sarah Chen had left the police force 6 months after Reed's conviction. The harassment from other officers had made her job impossible and dangerous. When she called for backup during a domestic violence call, it took other units 20 minutes to respond to what should have been a 3-minute emergency. Chen now worked as a victim advocate at a nonprofit organization that helped people navigate the legal system after experiencing violence. The pay was much less than her police salary, but Chen felt like she was finally doing work that matched her values. "I became a cop to protect people," Chen told her supervisor at the nonprofit. "When I saw other cops hurting people instead of protecting them, I knew I had to make a choice." Chen often thought about Dorothy Washington and wondered if she was recovering well. Chen had testified truthfully during Reed's trial, but she still felt guilty about the false report she had initially written. If she had been braver from the beginning, maybe Reed's pattern of abuse would have been stopped sooner. Reed had been in prison for 18 months when his behavior became increasingly erratic. The isolation and shame were driving him to mental breakdown. He got into fights with other inmates and had multiple disciplinary violations on his record. Reed's drinking problem had been replaced by prescription drug abuse. He was getting pills from other inmates and taking them to numb his emotional pain. The drugs made him paranoid and aggressive, leading to more problems with guards and inmates. Reed's health was deteriorating rapidly. The combination of poor prison food, lack of exercise, drug abuse, and constant stress had aged him dramatically. He looked like a man in his 60s rather than his mid-40s. Reed's ex-wife, Janet, had remarried a year after their divorce was finalized. Her new husband was a teacher who treated her children with kindness and respect. Janet rarely thought about Reed anymore, except when the children asked questions about their father. Marcus Reed had been in prison for 2 years when his health began to fail dramatically. The combination of stress, poor nutrition, drug abuse, and his inability to cope with prison life had taken a severe toll on his body. Reed spent most days in his cell, barely eating the prison food and taking whatever pills he could get from other inmates. He had gained over 50 pounds from inactivity and had developed high blood pressure and diabetes. The prison doctor had warned him multiple times about his deteriorating condition, but Reed ignored all medical advice. Reed's breathing had become labored, and he often felt chest pains. He complained to the prison guards about feeling sick, but they assumed he was faking illness to get attention or better treatment. Reed had cried wolf too many times with false medical complaints. On a cold Tuesday morning in February, Reed woke up feeling worse than usual. His chest felt tight and his left arm was tingling. He tried to call for help, but his voice was weak and the guards were busy with their morning routines. Reed's cellmate, Carlos Vega, found him collapsed on the floor of their cell at 7:30 a.m. Reed was conscious but gasping for breath, his face gray and sweaty. "Guard! Guard!" Vega shouted, genuinely concerned despite his hatred for Reed. "Something's wrong with him." The prison medical team arrived within minutes, but Reed was already going into cardiac arrest. The stress of prison life, combined with his poor health choices and underlying medical conditions, had finally caught up with him. Reed was rushed to the prison hospital, where doctors worked frantically to save his life, but the damage to his heart was too severe. At 9:47 a.m., Marcus Reed was pronounced dead at the age of 45. The news of Reed's death reached Maya Washington that afternoon. A reporter called asking for her reaction to the former officer's passing. Maya felt a complex mix of emotions. She was not happy that Reed was dead. She had never wished for his death. But she also felt a sense of closure, knowing that the man who had hurt her mother could never harm anyone else. "I'm not celebrating his death," Maya told the reporter, "but I hope this brings some peace to my mother and to other victims of police brutality." Dorothy Washington was sitting in her favorite chair, working on a crossword puzzle with her good hand when Maya told her about Reed's death. Dorothy was having a clear day mentally, and she understood what Maya was telling her. "He was so angry," Dorothy said softly, shaking her head. "All that anger must have been eating him up inside. I feel sorry for his children." Maya was amazed by her mother's compassion. Even after everything Reed had done to her, Dorothy could still feel sympathy for his family. Reed's death barely made the local news. He had become irrelevant to most people, just another ex-cop who had died in prison. His ex-wife Janet learned about his death from a brief mention on the evening news. Janet felt sad for a moment, remembering the man Reed had been when they first met. But that person had been destroyed by anger and hatred long before he died. Janet's main concern was helping their children process their father's death. 14-year-old Tyler Reed had mixed feelings about his father's passing. He was old enough to understand that his father had done terrible things, but Reed was still his dad. "I'm sad that he's dead," Tyler told his mother, "but I'm also relieved that I don't have to worry about him getting out of prison and embarrassing us again." 10-year-old Emma was more confused than sad. She had few good memories of her father, mostly just images of him yelling and drinking. She felt guilty for not feeling sadder about his death. Reed's funeral was a small, quiet affair. Only his ex-wife, children, and a few family members attended. None of his former police colleagues came to pay their respects. The man who had once been part of a brotherhood of officers died alone and forgotten. The autopsy showed that Reed had died of a massive heart attack brought on by severe coronary artery disease. Years of stress, poor diet, heavy drinking, and drug abuse had clogged his arteries and weakened his heart. The prison environment had accelerated his decline. Reed's death certificate listed his occupation as unemployed rather than police officer. Even in death, he was no longer considered part of the law enforcement community that had once been his identity. 6 months after Reed's death, Dorothy Washington passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 76 years old. Her death was not directly caused by her injuries, but the stress and trauma of the attack had certainly contributed to her decline. Dorothy died at home, surrounded by her family. Maya held her mother's good hand as Dorothy took her final breath. Her last words were, "I forgive him," though Maya wasn't sure if she was talking about Reed or someone else from her past. Dorothy's funeral was completely different from Reed's. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects. Neighbors, church members, civil rights activists, and people who had been inspired by Dorothy's story filled the church. Maya spoke at her mother's funeral, describing Dorothy as a woman who had faced hatred with love and violence with forgiveness. "My mother never let what happened to her turn her heart bitter," Maya said through her tears. She continued to see the good in people, even after someone hurt her so badly. That's the lesson she taught all of us. Sarah Chen attended Dorothy's funeral, feeling that she needed to pay her respects to the woman whose case had changed her life. Chen approached Maya afterward to offer her condolences. "Your mother was a remarkable woman," Chen said. "I'm glad I was able to help get justice for her." Maya thanked Chen for having the courage to tell the truth during Reed's trial. "You risked your career to do what was right. My mother would have been proud of that." The Dorothy Washington Justice Foundation continued its work after Dorothy's death. The foundation had grown into a national organization that provided legal assistance to victims of police brutality and advocated for police reform. Maya had become a respected voice in the civil rights community. She traveled around the country speaking about her mother's case and the need for police accountability. She had turned her family's tragedy into a force for positive change. The police department where Reed had worked had been completely transformed. The new training programs and oversight mechanisms had reduced excessive force incidents by 70%. The department now served as a model for other agencies trying to improve community relations. Chief Maria Rodriguez had implemented a memorial program honoring victims of police misconduct. Dorothy Washington's name was prominently displayed in the police station lobby, reminding officers every day of their duty to protect all citizens. Dorothy Washington represents everything we should strive to protect, Chief Rodriguez said at the memorial dedication. Her dignity and grace in the face of injustice should inspire all of us to be better. Reed's children grew up to be good people despite their father's legacy. Tyler became a social worker who specialized in helping families affected by violence. Emma became a teacher who worked with underprivileged children. Both children changed their last names when they turned 18, not wanting to be associated with their father's crimes. They rarely spoke about Reed, preferring to honor the memory of their stepfather, who had raised them with love and respect. The video of Reed attacking Dorothy was still used in police training academies across the country. New officers watched the footage and discussed what Reed should have done differently. The case became a textbook example of how not to interact with vulnerable citizens. Legal scholars continued to study the case as an example of successful police accountability. The fact that Reed had been convicted and sentenced to prison was seen as progress, in a system that too often protected bad officers. But the real legacy of the case was not about Reed's punishment or the legal precedents it set. The real legacy was about Dorothy Washington's dignity and her family's determination to seek justice. Dorothy had shown the world how to face hatred with grace and violence with forgiveness. She never sought revenge against Reed, only justice and accountability. Her example inspired others to demand better from their police departments and their communities. Maya continued to visit her mother's grave every week, bringing fresh flowers and updates about the foundation's work. She often brought her own children, teaching them about their grandmother's strength and courage. "Your grandmother changed the world," Maya would tell her kids at Dorothy's graveside. She showed everyone that even the smallest person can make a difference when they stand up for what's right. Reed was buried in a simple grave with a modest headstone that listed only his name and dates of birth and death. No mention of his service as a police officer. No visitors came to leave flowers or pay respects. The contrast between the two graves told the complete story. Dorothy Washington was remembered and honored for her grace and dignity in the face of injustice. Marcus Reed was forgotten, a cautionary tale about the consequences of hatred and abuse of power. In the end, justice had been served, not just through the courts and legal system, but through the power of truth and the strength of the human spirit. Dorothy Washington had won not just her case, but the hearts and minds of everyone who heard her story. Reed's death in prison was simply the final chapter in a story that had already reached its true conclusion. Good had triumphed over evil. Love had conquered hate, and an elderly woman's quiet dignity had exposed the ugly truth about abuse of power.